So, in this series, we've talked a lot about how AI fluency isn't the same as truth, and how the right data can be more important than the model itself. But that leads us to the hardest question of all. How do we actually know if an AI is any good? How do we know if it really works? Let's get into it. You see numbers like this everywhere. An AI scores 95% on some test, and it feels solid, right? Objective, impressive. It sounds like the system is reliable, maybe even intelligent. But the reality is, a single number like this can be incredibly misleading. And this right here is the single most important idea to get your head around. The numbers we use, all these metrics, they don't tell us what a system understands. They don't measure comprehension or knowledge. All they do is describe how a system behaves under very specific controlled conditions. That distinction is everything. All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to start by picking apart that 95% score. Then, we'll dive into the critical trade-offs that every AI system has to make. After that, we'll look at the big standardized tests that dominate the field, the problem of teaching to the test, and why, at the end of the day, human judgment is still the most important measure we have. You know, it's funny. Sometimes building an AI model is the easy part. The truly hard part is knowing if it actually works. See, AI systems are really good at looking impressive on the surface, hitting a high score, while failing in ways you can't easily see. And that is the 95% illusion. The metric everyone knows, the one we see the most, is accuracy. It's really simple, very intuitive. It just asks, out of all the guesses the model made, how many did it get right? It feels like a grade on a school test. And on paper, 95% accuracy looks fantastic. That's an A grade. But let's think about a spam filter. Imagine that 95% of all the emails you get are not spam. Well, a model that does absolutely nothing except predict not spam for every single email will be right 95% of the time. It gets 95% accuracy, but it's completely and utterly useless because it lets all the actual spam through. That's how a great-looking score can give you a totally false sense of security. And that spam filter example is exactly why we have to move beyond one simple number. It's not just about how often a model is wrong, it's about the kind of mistakes it makes. Because not all errors are equal. And this brings us to the real heart of evaluation, making decisions and weighing trade-offs. So, to understand a model's mistakes, you need to balance two key ideas: precision and recall. Precision asks, when the model flagged something as positive, how often was it actually right? This helps you avoid false alarms. But recall asks a totally different question. Of all the actual positive cases out there, how many did the model manage to find? This is about avoiding dangerous misses. Just think about medical screening. A false alarm, a false positive, is stressful. It's an inconvenience. But a dangerous miss, a false negative, could be catastrophic. That trade-off is absolutely critical. The tool that lets us see this trade-off clearly is called a confusion matrix. Now, don't let the name intimidate you. Just think of it as the complete case file on the model's performance. Instead of one number, it gives you the whole story. Every correct hit, every dangerous miss, every false alarm, and every correct rejection. This is how you turn a simple score into a real strategic conversation about risk. Of course, not every problem is a simple yes or no decision. Different kinds of tasks need different kinds of measurement. But the core idea that we're measuring specific behaviors, not some general intelligence, that stays exactly the same. So let's run through a few others you'll see. The F1 score basically just combines precision and recall into one number, which gives you a nice, balanced view. Then you have something called AUC-ROC, which measures how good a model is at telling two things apart, say a safe loan versus a risky one across a whole range of decision points. If you're predicting a number like the price of a house, you use something like mean squared error, which is just a fancy way of saying how far off was the prediction, on average. And for language models, you have scores like BLEU and ROUGE. It is vital to remember these are just sophisticated pattern matchers. They measure how fluent the text is, not whether the model actually understands what it's saying. Okay, so this brings us to the big leagues of evaluation, these huge standardized benchmarks. You can think of them as the SATs or the final exams for AI models. They're designed to be the ultimate test of what a system can do. Two of the heavyweights you'll hear about are MMLU and HELM. MMLU tests a model's knowledge across 57 different subjects, everything from law and medicine to history. And HELM is this massive framework for testing models in all sorts of different scenarios.
The whole goal is to create a standardized playing field, a fair way to compare one system against another. So when you see a top model hit a score like this, almost 90%, on a test as hard as MMLU, it really feels like we're getting close to human-level performance. The number is staggering. It suggests a really broad general knowledge. But we have to ask the deeper question.
Are we actually measuring intelligence here, or are we just measuring performance on a very specific, very well-defined test? That distinction might seem subtle, but it is probably the most important one in all of AI evaluation. And this leads us straight into one of the biggest challenges in the entire field, what's known as gaming the leaderboard. This is the phenomenon where the scores keep going up, but the model's real-world general abilities don't always follow. It's the illusion of progress.
Here's how this cycle works. A new, tough benchmark is created. Then, over time, models are tweaked and fine-tuned specifically to do well on that test. Sometimes this even happens accidentally, through what's called data contamination, where questions from the test leak into the massive ocean of data the model trains on. The result? The scores go up, for sure, but it creates this inflated sense of how capable the model truly is. Because in a sense, it's already seen the answers. And here's the catch. As the top models get closer and closer to a perfect score, the tests themselves start to become less useful. It's called a ceiling effect. The test just isn't hard enough anymore to tell the difference between a great system and an amazing one. So the community has to go out and invent an even harder test, and the whole cycle starts all over again. So if the numbers alone can be gamed, if they can be misleading, what's the solution? We don't just throw out the metrics. We supplement them with the one thing they can't capture: human judgment. And this isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of maturity. It's the only way to build real trust. I mean, think about it. Humans are essential for judging things like nuance or context or safety, the kind of stuff you can't just boil down to a number. In fact, for a lot of these tasks, human input is what creates the ground truth data that we use to train and test the models in the first place. And when a model fails, you need a human expert to dig in and figure out why it failed. Ultimately, for anything high stakes, real trust can only be built with careful human oversight. So let's bring this all home. If there's one thing you take away from this, let it be this: metrics do not measure intelligence. What they do measure, and they measure it very well, is how a system behaves under the specific, often a very narrow, conditions of the test itself. The evaluation is what defines the reality. And all of this empowers us to ask a much better question. We shouldn't be asking, how high is the score? We should be asking, is this the right test for my specific problem? And what critical things does this number not tell me? Because in AI, what you measure is what you believe.